The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of the small house on Maple Street, casting gentle shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Sarah stood at the stove, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred the pot of rice. She had been married to Marcus for 7 years now, and in that time, she had learned to read the warning signs in his voice, the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when things weren't exactly as he expected them to be. Today she had forgotten something simple, something small. She had forgotten to add salt to the rice. It seemed like such a minor thing, really. Just a pinch of white crystals that most people wouldn't even notice was missing until they took their first bite. But in this house, on this particular morning, it would become the spark that lit a fire Sarah never saw coming. Marcus came home from his shift at the warehouse just after noon, his work boots heavy on the wooden steps of their front porch. Sarah heard him before she saw him, and her heart began to race in that familiar way. It always did when she sensed his mood might be dark. She quickly set the table, placing the bowl of plain rice alongside the chicken she had prepared, hoping the flavor of the meat would somehow compensate for what the rice was lacking. "Food ready?" Marcus called out as he walked through the door, not bothering to remove his boots. "Yes, honey. It's on the table," Sarah replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus sat down heavily in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. He was a large man, broad-shouldered and strong from years of manual labor. Sarah had once found comfort in those strong arms. Back when they first met at the church social all those years ago, back when his hands were gentle and his words were kind. He picked up his fork and took a large bite of rice. Then he stopped. His jaw stopped moving. His eyes, which had been tired and distant just a moment before, suddenly focused with an intensity that made Sarah's stomach drop. "There's no salt in this rice," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Sarah's hands gripped the edge of the counter behind her. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I must have forgotten. I can add some now, it'll just take a—" She didn't get to finish her sentence. Marcus stood up so quickly that his chair fell backward with a crash that echoed through the small house. "You must have forgotten?" he repeated, his voice rising with each word. "You had one job, Sarah, one simple job. Make a decent meal for your husband who works all day to keep a roof over your head." "Please, Marcus, I'm sorry." "Let me fix it," Sarah pleaded, taking a small step backward. But Marcus was already moving around the table toward her, his face twisted with anger that seemed far too large for such a small mistake. The rice was just rice after all. But to Marcus, it was another example of Sarah's failures, another excuse to release the rage that seemed to live inside him like a caged animal always looking for a way out. What happened next happened quickly, though to Sarah it felt like time had slowed down to a painful crawl. Marcus grabbed her by the shoulders, his fingers digging into her flesh through the thin fabric of her light blue shirt. He shook her, yelling about respect and gratitude and all the things he thought she owed him. Then his hand pulled back, and Sarah felt the sharp sting of his palm against her cheek. She fell backward, rice from his explosive gesture scattering across her shirt and onto the floor like white confetti at the world's saddest celebration. Her vision blurred with tears, both from the physical pain and from the deeper ache of knowing that this was her life now. This was what their marriage had become. Marcus stood over her for a moment, breathing heavily, his fists still clenched at his sides. Then, as if suddenly aware of what he had done, he stepped back. "Look what you made me do," he muttered, grabbing his keys from the counter. "I'm going out, and when I get back, this better be cleaned up." The front door slammed shut, and the house fell silent except for the sound of Sarah's quiet sobbing. She sat there on the floor for a long time, rice stuck to her clothes and tears rolling down her bruised cheek. In that moment, something inside her began to shift. It wasn't a dramatic change, not a sudden bolt of courage or a flash of anger. It was quieter than that. It was the slow, steady awakening of a woman who had finally reached her limit. Sarah had never fought back before. She had never stood up to Marcus or challenged his authority in their home. She had been taught, both by her upbringing and by years of Marcus's control, that a wife should be submissive, should keep the peace, should sacrifice her own dignity for the sake of maintaining the marriage. But as she picked herself up off that floor and began to brush the rice from her shirt, Sarah realized something profound. She realized that there was a difference between keeping the peace and accepting abuse. There was a difference between being a good wife and being a victim. She walked slowly to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror. Her cheek was already beginning to swell. a red mark in the shape of Marcus's hand clearly visible on her brown skin. She touched it gently, wincing at the tenderness. Then she looked into her own eyes and made a decision. Sarah didn't know where Marcus had gone, but she knew he would be gone for a few hours at least. He always was after incidents like this, as if giving her time to calm down and accept what had happened. But this time Sarah wasn't going to calm down. This time she was going to act. She went to their bedroom and pulled out the small suitcase she kept in the back of the closet. She began to pack carefully, methodically, taking only the things that mattered most to her. Her grandmother's Bible, the photograph of her mother, a few changes of clothes. She moved through the house like someone in a dream, or perhaps finally waking up from one. Next, she went to the kitchen drawer where she kept important papers. She took out her birth certificate, their marriage license, the deed to the house that was in both their names, and the small bank book that showed the account Marcus didn't know she had been slowly adding to for the past 2 years. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a fresh start. Then Sarah did something that surprised even herself. She went back to the stove where the pot of unsalted rice still sat. She picked it up, walked to Marcus's place at the table, and dumped the entire pot directly onto his chair. Then she took the salt shaker and poured salt over the rice until the chair was covered in a white mountain of seasoning and grain. On a piece of paper she wrote a simple note. "Here's your salt. I'm done seasoning my life to your taste." Sarah called her sister, Rebecca, who lived 2 towns over. Rebecca had been begging Sarah to leave Marcus for years, offering her a place to stay whenever she was ready. When Rebecca heard the tremor in Sarah's voice on the phone, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes felt like the longest of Sarah's life. She sat on the front porch with her suitcase, watching the street for both Rebecca's car and any sign of Marcus returning. Her heart pounded in her chest, but underneath the fear was something else. Something that felt almost like hope. When Rebecca's blue sedan finally pulled up to the curb, Sarah didn't look back at the house. She didn't second-guess her decision or wonder if she was overreacting. She simply picked up her suitcase, walked to her sister's car, and got in. "Are you okay?" Rebecca asked, her eyes immediately finding the mark on Sarah's cheek. "I will be," Sarah answered, and for the first time in years, she believed it. As they drove away, Sarah watched the house on Maple Street grow smaller in the side mirror. She thought about Marcus coming home to find her gone, to find his chair covered in rice and salt, to find the note that would tell him she had finally found her voice. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if Marcus would try to find her or if he would let her go. She didn't know how she would rebuild her life or what shape that life would take. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would never again diminish herself to make someone else feel bigger. She would never again apologize for forgetting the salt while someone else forgot her humanity. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to travel. And that, Sarah realized as the afternoon sun warmed her face through the car window, made all the difference. She had finally served herself the one ingredient that had been missing all along. The courage to choose herself. The rice had needed salt, but Sarah had needed freedom. And in the end, she had given herself something far more valuable than any seasoning could provide. She had given herself a chance to taste life again, on her own terms.